Can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I always like talking to the Panthers whenever I get a chance. So my name is Kyle Ward. I'm the Director of Social Studies Education at Minnesota State University, Mankato, so a real southern part of the state here. And mostly what I do is work with future social studies teachers like yours, doing some training, but I also do some history classes that I teach. Like right now, I'm teaching a World War II course as well. But the biggest reason I'm here is my area of research is historiography. And what that means is it's kind of the history of history. So historically events happen, but then over time things change and have an impact on them as to why we remember them, how we remember them, how people write about them, and things like that too.
So,
So,
do you want
oh, go
to
ahead, sorry.
talk a little bit about the first Thanksgiving, kind of how the narratives change throughout time and what that tells us
Sure.
about that same time period?
So I love talking about Thanksgiving because from like a historiographical sense, you really see the impact. So while I'm talking, you'll notice like economics plays a role, politics plays a role, society, religion, all these different things. And so the memories that we have sometimes aren't necessarily the same. Jonathan, you maybe help me out real quick here too. I kind of like to have some of your students real quickly share, like when it comes to Thanksgiving, favorite foods, favorite traditions. What do you guys do? What happens in Pennsylvania?
Skiing for like 5 days. That's yeah. That's the big one. Go yeah. With my family. That's basically it.
My family just eats whatever. Like one Thanksgiving, I had pizza.
Um, like
We don't really have like a
like
tradition.
I said, we have a big meal, but I can never remember what it is. I don't remember if we ever actually even eat. We get a turkey, but it's not a big one. It's more like a cut up turkey.
What do you do?
Family isn't it? Doesn't celebrate.
Okay, so pizza, maybe one that's a little traditional and one doesn't. I think we got pizza and boneless wings lately. We've been kind of, I guess the tradition's been dying out with my family too.
Okay, okay. That's really interesting. That's part of the historiography right there. Because usually people go through and say, I like turkey and pumpkin pie, go through, all the potatoes and stuff like that. Interesting enough, in 1621, there was no turkey being served. The Native Americans brought venison, they brought deer. There may have been some ducks, so that would have been the bird that they would have had. I always like to tell people this, pumpkin was probably there, but it was not a pumpkin pie. They didn't have the ovens to make pumpkin pies yet. They also lacked sugar and butter. The Pilgrims did not have those as major ingredients at that time. But if they would have, and I'm going to challenge all of you to add this to your Thanksgiving lunches and meals, is they would boil pumpkin. So turn into like kind of a pumpkin stew type of thing. How tasty that's going to be here. And then keep in mind too, potatoes aren't really native to North America, so they're not really in abundance here either at this point in time as well. In terms of historiography, this was not the first Thanksgiving. Most Americans think, oh, this is the first time this ever happened. Truth be told, in Europe and throughout colonial America, there had been a number of other Thanksgivings along the way too. Usually, a Thanksgiving day meant like thanking God for something like we just won this battle or this war, or we had a really good harvest, we survived this drought, or something else like that as well. And then also at the same time, having a celebration for the harvest was very common throughout the world. Wampanoag Native Americans also had a celebration for the harvest too, so that was something that wasn't too uncommon for them. We know about this event because in 1621, Edward Winslow, and I like to say this too because this is another reason I like to talk about this, a gentleman by the name of William Bradford, who was the first governor of Plymouth Plantation, and I get to lay claim, he's my 17 times great grandfather. So I've got that kind of connection going back there as well. Um, we know that 50 English, as they refer to it, English men, but there were men and women there, and 90 Wampanoag Native Americans showed up, all men. There were no Native American women that showed up here too. And this is mostly a diplomatic event. They were kind of thanking each other, Native Americans, thank you for showing us how to survive the winter and everything else like that here as well. Well, that happened in 1621, and then the story just kind of disappears. Nobody really talks about it. In New England, a few people had some memories of it, but that was pretty much it. The only other Thanksgivings we have was George Washington at the end of the American Revolutionary War called for a day of Thanksgiving. James Madison called for a day of Thanksgiving after the War of 1812. And then it's not until I'm going to get the date here, 1841. So about 400 years later, a minister by the name of Andrew Young wrote about that first Thanksgiving. And so it kind of got the title, and it kind of comes back into America's consciousness. But he does not get credit for us having a Thanksgiving. That's going to go to a young lady by the name of Sarah Josepha Hale. She wrote, and it'd be like a woman's magazine today, maybe, or a women's website. So she was writing a goodies ladies book, and this was how to cook and clean and take care of, the domestic areas and stuff like that. But she thought, since our country was so young, we needed a day of unity. We needed a reason to come together. So she kept pushing for this idea of a Thanksgiving. And I'm glad to hear that some of you have changed your diets and not doing the traditional. What was funny is she wanted all Americans to celebrate this. So the best way to celebrate, you can't go out and tell people, let's go to a five-star restaurant and have your chef make your own personal meal to you. 99% of us, that's not going to work out. So she came up with some ideas that everybody could get, something like a turkey, which is going to be fairly cheap. It's going to be a big bird to go ahead and eat. Things like pumpkin pie. Pumpkin's fairly cheap to get here as well. Potatoes, all the things that we associate today, we're kind of like, okay, everybody can get those. Everybody can get that kind of food here and get that kind of stuff here too. And again, her goal is to foster national unity. Nothing works. Almost 2 decades of her pushing for this, and it's not until Abraham Lincoln becomes president. And in 1863, he's going to put out a proclamation. And what was happening in 1863 is that summer, as you probably all know, the Battle of Gettysburg took place. And then he does the Gettysburg Address, and he goes, yeah, we need to step back and have a day of Thanksgiving, even in the midst of the war. We need to remember the soldiers and have a blessing from God for all the things that are taking place here as well. He said in his proclamation, the last Thursday of November would be the official day. Remember that, because that's going to come back in just a second here too. And what I love about this is he got a shot into the South by proclaiming Thanksgiving, because he knew, and everybody knew back then, Plymouth Plantation was not America's first colony. Jamestown's going to be the first colony. Actually, 2 years before the Thanksgiving in Plymouth, Jamestown had something that resembled a Thanksgiving. But he said, nope, you're trying to secede from us here, so we're going to block you from the history. And Massachusetts, congratulations, you're now the Genesis story of America. It's not Jamestown anymore. It's the Pilgrims coming for religious freedom and all these other things like that as well. Got to give credit. In the modern day, a lot of historians are looking at and saying, actually the Spanish had a Thanksgiving in Florida as well. So Plymouth Plantation is not going to be the first. The other thing that's missing from this story, and I'll mention this again in just a couple of seconds here, but is the indigenous perspective. For centuries, we just kind of ignored. They were just happily showing up. They were just, and unfortunately, old textbooks, which I'll talk about too, they referred to them as the savages. And so here's the great white culture coming in, showing them all these great things, these religious things, all these modern things and stuff like that, when in reality, it was the Native Americans that kept them alive through that winter there as well. Native Americans, I don't know if this happens in Pennsylvania, but some of the Native American tribes here in Minnesota also refer to it as the National Day of Mourning. So they do not celebrate Thanksgiving. They remember it for being more of a negative aspect of it as well. And then this is where I'm kind of curious too, with some of the traditions that are out there. Today, in modern day historiography, national unity's gone away. No one said your family stands up and does the Pledge of Allegiance. So that national patriotic duty thing has kind of gone by the wayside. Religion, not necessarily usually a major portion of it as well here, but family, the family getting together, a reason for the family to get together. And now look at the economics here. Eating, food, lots and lots of food. Football is going to be played all day. I think of all the commercials that come with that as well. And then, dun, 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 Black Friday is going to be a major role here as well. So we went from kind of that religious aspect to more of a consumer aspect of the whole thing here as well. And then I'll jump into textbooks real quickly. Basically, for a few hundred years, it was just this great myth. The Englishmen came over here looking for their freedom of religion. They survived the winter. They wanted to thank the Native Americans. This is a great religious moment and things like that. Let me ask the people in the room here, Jonathan, if you can help direct this conversation. It's not until the 1950s and 60s that we actually see a change in our textbooks about how the story has changed. And that came out of the civil rights movement. What I'm curious to find out from your students is why would Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, stuff like that, have any impact on how we tell the story of Thanksgiving? Any guesses?
Would it be
Did I
something
stump
like,
them?
would it be like something to do with like the, like, I mean, I'm okay.
Do you think you give some context on what it might have been before the civil rights movement? And
So
maybe
yeah, it was
that'll
very,
some thoughts.
very mythical. It was just kind of these. You always saw these wonderful paintings in textbooks, and the pilgrims were all dressed in their white and black and their stovepipe hats and stuff like that. Native Americans were always just sitting on the ground and things like that. When civil rights comes in, and you see this all the time, one of the first things they always want to do is they want to go to textbooks. They want to have an impact on what the next generation learns about these different things here. And so it wasn't originally about Thanksgiving, but it was more about slavery. So what were African Americans demanding when it came to history textbooks after the 1960s and 70s, after the civil rights movement? What did they want to see in textbooks?
Proper representation of like the truth.
Yep.
Did
I
you hear
heard it
that?
out there. Like,
Yeah, so
um,
like said proper representation.
Yeah, exactly. Not just the story of the ignorant slaves from Africa were brought here. There used to be stories in textbooks like, look at this, we brought them Christianity, we brought them English, we taught them all these trades and stuff like that. It's like, oh man, okay, you're missing the big picture on slavery. So they wanted more emphasis on the cruelty behind it and everything else like that. As an offshoot of that, and this is something that matters to us here in Minnesota because it's going to start here. There's a group called AIM in the 1970s. And it's the American Indian movement that starts here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And they said, whoa, 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 whoa. They weren't just friendly Indians. They were actually a tribe. They were the Wampanoag. They had their own government system. They had their own trading system. They had alliances that the Pilgrims plugged themselves into. So we want more details about that. We don't want just to have these pictures of happy Native Americans enjoying a meal with the white settlers that are here as well. So AIMS, American Indian Movement's terminology is going to have an impact here as well. And then just the last thing, I'll leave you with some of the other interesting things that are out there. Have any of you ever heard of Franksgiving? Franksgiving came up in 1939 when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, no, we're going to move Thanksgiving from the last Thursday to the third Thursday, the second to last Thursday here. This is during the Great Depression. He wanted to extend time so people would go out and do more Christmas shopping. This was not one of his wiser moves. When you get a chance, if you haven't studied this already, I'm sure you'll cover it in the future here. He also tries to expand the Supreme Court at one point. They weren't voting the way he wanted to, so he wanted to add more members and then appoint all the members to agree with him. These are two times that his own party turned against him. One was for Thanksgiving, and they said, no, 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 no. Thanksgiving is going to be set on this day. We cannot change that. We don't care. So his own Democratic Party is going to vote against him as well. That happened in 1941, just before World War II broke out here. Trivia Pursuit time. I'll leave you with a couple of Trivia Pursuit questions here. Presidents do what just before Thanksgiving with the turkey?
Pardon, yeah.
Yeah, they do the pardon. Now, Trivia Pursuit time. Who was the first president to make it official that they were going to pardon the turkey? Do you guys have any guesses?
I think this just
Wasn't it?
60s.
I thought it was HW.
Is it Ronald Reagan?
Uh,
We're close with Reagan. I think I may have heard the other one too. George H.W. Bush, 1989. Most people think it goes way back. It's not. It's kind of a modern tradition, and presidents have been doing that ever since here. Kennedy actually kind of pardoned one. Abraham Lincoln was sent to Turkey, and their family turned it into a pet, so that he did not get pardoned at that time. And then the last thing I'm going to leave you with, Gabe, because I just kind of am happy this tradition didn't take off, but also kind of sad too, because it would have really changed things drastically. 1926, Calvin Coolidge is in the White House, and an American said, hey, I'm going to send you something you can have for your Thanksgiving meal. He sent the Coolidge family a raccoon. He thought having raccoon for Thanksgiving would be the ideal type of food that Americans should eat here. Man, that changes the images of Thanksgiving very quickly if we don't have turkeys and we have raccoon on the platter at this point in time. Again, the Coolidge family turned it into a pet, so they just kept it and said, we'll keep it for ourselves at this point. So sorry for going really quickly through all that, but I hope you can kind of see we had an event. We know exactly what happened. Winslow and Bradford told us the story. It kind of disappeared, became unimportant. Then a minister and the woman who wrote about it started saying, there's other reasons we should have this. So that comes back, and then you start seeing all the traditions. There's some religious traditions, some economic traditions, societal traditions, and all kind of play a role in all this here. Jonathan, that kind of wraps up the comments that I have here. Do you or any of the students have questions?
The most obvious one is like, how do you celebrate Thanksgiving?
We are very traditional with the turkey and potatoes and a lot of football and things like that. We've also incorporated here in Minnesota because we have such a large Norwegian American population. There are some Norwegian American foods that kind of show up. Lefse is going to come in, kroomkake, which is a cookie and things like that. So, and then lots of football.
Can you talk a little bit more about John Winthrop's first Thanksgiving? Because isn't that kind of darker, like at the conclusion of a war that's kind of the opposite of the image we get from artwork of that nice, cohesive, friendly Thanksgiving of natives and settlers?
Yeah, historiography has spent a lot of time trying to ignore those types of things because that's not if the first Thanksgiving is part of that Genesis story, which started our country and made it great. Jonathan, you're exactly right here. We don't want to spend time talking about all the wars that are going to take place. Real quickly, what happened at Thanksgiving is a snapshot, and things were going well for the very first generation of pilgrims. Things are fairly good between them and the Native Americans. But then we're going to get later on down the road, like King Philip's War and some of these other colonial wars. And these are very brutal wars against each other. Unfortunately, textbooks, the way they write about them, sometimes they make it sound like the original Pilgrims were part of this. But some of these wars are like 30, 40, 50 years after the actual Thanksgiving, which is going to kind of cause a problem if we're trying to tell the story because that version of Thanksgiving, the fighting that's taking place, the diseases that are passed back and forth, Native American populations are going to get hit hard once the European settlers come in here as well. And as you can see, that's not a Hallmark Thanksgiving card type of moment. So we're just going to gloss over all that and not go too into detail with any of that.
I was going to say, I don't know what kind of card that would be if King Philip's head was on a pike. That'd be like a Halloween card.
And this is why Jonathan is a social studies teacher and doesn't work for Hallmark Corp. So
Yeah. I mean, no, they might sell a lot. People will have their niches.
Probably tastes good.
It's a
I mean,
prime minister, prime rib.
They must have had something right when they ate their prime minister.
I know you did work with Dr. James Lowen before he passed on monuments. I thought it was interesting how you said Jamestown was like the first colony and how we kind of start, you said our genesis, our origin story there. As far as I know from reading James Lowen, he kind of doesn't, it's not necessarily at odds with what you said, but he kind of implied that it's a neater story for a national heritage and origin to say, it was these godly people getting along with natives, doing all the supposed right things instead of the undesirables shipped off to Jamestown and cannibals and godless and this and that. I'm just more commenting than questioning, but what can you like add to that or?
yeah, definitely. The Jamestown colony was set up for financial reasons. There's no record of like, let's set up these churches and here's our minister, and women didn't show up for quite a while there. Whereas the Plymouth plantation, it's going to have a religious undertone to it. Families are going to be sent along with it. But again, we don't like to talk about this. But Plymouth plantation only existed because of financial backing. They had to send stuff back. And it's supposed to be a profit making. It wasn't just, get out of our country and celebrate your own religion. They used it for that way. But yeah, you don't want to, and I agree with Lowen, it's a neater story. It's that there's a famous painting of the pilgrims walking through the snow going to church. So here's that wholesome moment here. Having a painting of a bunch of guys sitting around just looking for gold and trying to find money, strip the land and get it back. And their relations with the Native Americans start off on a bad foot and just kind of continue in Jamestown too. So if we want to tell a story about ourselves and tell future Americans who we are, having that religious connotation, the family, see we get along with everybody, that's going to work better. Kind of an ironic twist, as I mentioned, the consumerism that really kind of drives Thanksgiving today is a little bit more in line with what Jamestown was than what Plymouth Plantation was.
Thank you for turning my comment into a teaching moment. I think also with James Lowen, when he talks about the quote unquote pilgrims, I think he kind of challenges that they were coming for religious freedom a little bit. He kind of implies that. Can you talk about that? Is that right on, or is it more nuanced?
That they had come for religious freedom?
Because he talks about, well, they had that in like the Dutch Republic, and it was more for financial reasons or this and that, and
Yeah, a lot of people don't know. They left England. They actually went to Holland and were staying for a while. Unfortunately for the Pilgrims, their religion was starting, they were kind of centered at that point in time, and their kids were growing up Dutch. And the Pilgrims never wanted to not be Englishmen. They always wanted to be Englishmen. So having this opportunity to go to the New World was really helpful. But the Church of England said, you're not following by the rules. You're kind of questioning us here. How dare you? And keep in mind, in England, the head of the church was the king at this time. So if you question the church, you question the king, you're off to prison. I mean, going back to keeping your head on, that becomes an issue as well. So they are going to go to the New World. They are going to be, unbelievably strict. This is not a fun group of people here. You see a lot of the images of the stockade, and you hear stories about the Scarlet Letter. They celebrated no Halloween. Thanksgiving is kind of impressive that they actually did that, even more of a diplomatic meeting. There's no Christmas. There's none of these things here. You don't have holidays or anything else like that. So they're going to bring their very strict religion to the United States and get it started there. Also, not all of them were pilgrims. There were some people who were there just to kind of help set up the colony. So it wasn't purely this religious escape.
are there differences between the separatists like William Bradford and Puritans?
Yeah, you can kind of split hairs a little bit there. But yeah, some wanted to reform the Church of England, and others just said, let's just separate completely here. And then we get kind of messed up when we start saying pilgrims and Puritans and things like that. I'm not aware, no, I don't have enough of a background to split the dividing line between all those. But yeah, there's a little bit of a separate, and you'll start seeing the colony when it grows a little bit, depending on who the next shipment of pilgrims or Puritans are, you start seeing some different changes in the religious tones, heading more towards like some of the issues that we had with witches during the time. It's going to be more of a stricter group of people, gender issues and stuff like that they're going to be bringing over.
Yeah, the irony of religious tolerance.
100%.
Would you say that Jamestown is a better representation of America, like you said about how you said like Plymouth was a good representation of like what we like a good like more of an idealistic. Would you say that like Jamestown's a better representation of America itself?
Oh, that's a fantastic question.
That's awesome.
I think going back to historiography and what we look at our country today, consumerism, capitalism, and religious undertones and stuff like that are two things. So I'd kind of say you kind of have to bring the two together. The belief of what Plymouth Plantation was supposed to be and the reality of what Jamestown really was are kind of meshed together here. So I think that's a little bit more of a representation of where we find ourselves today. I think most Americans would adapt to that too, going, yeah, I completely believe in democracy and capitalism, but we also, religion is such an important part of so many people's lives in our country as well.
Could you talk about some of the biggest misconceptions you found in the historiography on people's, maybe like that you learned because of historiography on folks thinking this, but it's totally like dead wrong?
One thing that always jumps out to me, and I'm always amazed by this because I do this in my social studies methods classes, we look at images in textbooks and how many textbooks have the picture of the Alamo on the cover of it, and how many times we see the story of the Alamo and this huge story, everything else like that. What's interesting is if you go back in history textbooks, the Alamo doesn't really exist in old history textbooks. It doesn't come up until about the 1950s, early 1960s, because it becomes this huge moment in American history. historiographically, does anybody know what happened in the, I think it's late 1950s, that all of a sudden the Alamo became this huge historic event? This is really deep in the weeds here, by the way.
Is it like the rise of Westerns?
Yep, specifically John Wayne's, oh shoot, is it just called The Alamo? It was a different story. It was a movie. It was a blockbuster movie that they told the story of the Alamo, and then all of a sudden history textbooks picked up on it. And to this day now, it's this huge turning point in American history. But for the longest time, it got no recognition. It's really hard to find in any old history textbooks. Most people think like, oh, that was a seminal point in American history, and we must have been talking about it for decades. Now we ignored it for about a century.
I know, like I was always wondering about the Alamo because like they portray it as something big, and it was just like a holdout where like a couple people stood there for a second before they all got like massacred.
After they like
And then like
tried to
it's like
steal land.
what's another one? It was like Thermopylae. Like Thermopylae, they lost the battle, and then there was two battles after that, which were actually the important ones, but we don't remember those two. We remember Thermopylae because of the ideals it carries with it, and not the actual victory itself, because they completely lost it.
Easy to cherry pick ideas.
Exactly.
So what can you share with the students about the impact of pop culture on our historical understanding or our alleged understanding?
I have discovered in more research I've done here too, a vast majority of people know their history, unfortunately now through video games. A lot of video games that have historical concepts to them. I see a couple smiles out there. And movies. I just heard the other day there's a movie called Nuremberg that's out about the end of World War II and the trials in Germany about the Holocaust and the war and stuff like that. And most historians are looking at this going, no, no, got so much of this is completely wrong. But if you've, a lot of my students, when they come to my World War II class, are kind of quoting Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan, which is another big one as well. And they're really good movies, but Hollywood isn't always perfect. So a lot of our history comes from that pop culture genre. So it's teachers like Jonathan who have to save the day and come in and go, okay, there's some good things here, but you got to remember there's some other parts of it too that they just aren't showing.
Do you have some wholesome message for the students to be critical thinkers and use historiography in their daily lives?
Yeah, always question everything you're reading. Keep an open eye on it, going, okay, this is the way I've been told the story now, but how did this story change over time? What impact does society have on things like that? And then biggest thing is just keep reading. Just keep enjoying things. I'm hoping you're watching the Ken Burns series on the American Revolution. He's done a fantastic job with stuff like that. So just keep being interested in history.
Thank you, Dr. Ward.
Good seeing you guys.